Well, Matt, some exciting news about our Thrive app crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah.
We're now in December and our campaign kind of ends at the end of January, and we're looking to raise $30,000 before we start building this app. We're over halfway, which is amazing. But, Matt, we've got a donor who's offered from now until the end of January to basically match any donation that comes in.
Yeah, it's hugely generous.
Hugely generous.
And a great opportunity to see this through. And it's just to underscore again, this is a huge step forward in terms of engagement. People being able to have these resources on their device and with them to be able to use in the car and so forth.
Yeah, but also, Matt, I think all together in one place, because at the moment they listen to the podcasts here and they read the Thrive Bible Reading Guide there, and then there's these other video-generated resources we've got on discipleship. And so having all of that in one place, I think really is the added value to having this app. And I think you're totally right. This will give us just a greater capacity to reach more. And some other things we'll keep adding to it. But
it's great.
Yeah, it's going
exciting.
to be exciting. So, listeners, if you haven't as yet considered supporting our crowdfunding campaign for the Thrive app, can I encourage you to do that? Just jump to our website, thrivetoday.tv. At the top, it's got a little link to support the campaign. We just want to thank our generous donor for matching dollar for dollar the donations that come in between now and the end of January.
Absolutely.
Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible Reading Guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Good morning, Matt.
Morning, Stu.
Thrive Deeper, and we're into a new book of the Bible.
I wonder if people are going to stick with
Yeah.
With these sorts of books, I always wonder if people we're going to stick with us.
Well, hopefully they do. Because,
but I'm loving it.
Yeah. Good.
Is that the main thing?
That's the main thing, Matt.
Well, look, Stu, I think the reason, we've just finished Job, right? And Job is so fascinating because it, the way that it breaks through sort of neat theologies and desire to explain things, in a way that makes sense. And I'm so drawn to that sort of project, particularly with a philosophy background and feeling sort of resistant to our propensity to construct sort of neat systems of theology. And I just love the way that the book of Job, in a very literary way, dismantles that. And, I love literature and I love what literature can do, the art of literature. So for me, Job and now Ecclesiastes, I find them so fascinating in what they do. And I'm so glad that there are books like this in the Bible. It's not just straightforward injunctions or pieces of advice. So, we have that, and I'm grateful for that in, for example, a book of Proverbs. But man, this does something else.
Yeah, and I think this book, a book of Ecclesiastes, I think is really about shifting our perspective about how we view our world. And a lot of people would say it's probably one of the darkest books in the Bible. To some degree it is, but I think that depends on the perspective at which you come at it. And hopefully we can unpack that a bit today. It is steeped up, I guess, in philosophy, so we're going to try to stick to the texts if possible.
Yeah.
A little bit here.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
because there are some big ideas in here that speaks into our modern age without a doubt, totally. And in fact, I think perhaps speaks into our modern age. But let's just look at a bit of history. It's typically attributed to Solomon, but there's sort of the teacher or the Koheleth, as it's named in Hebrew, and then there's the author who kind of writes an introduction and an ending, and there's a possibility that it's the same person, but there's a suggestion that perhaps someone who's being close to Solomon or taken a note of his reflections through his life has penned this. Is that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I looked through what the commentaries were saying, and the most prominent commentaries on the book of Ecclesiastes tend to prefer saying something like, because this is very much a piece of literature, and for various reasons, it looks like it's written later than the time of Solomon.
Right.
And there are a number of, and actually quite good reasons why.
Well, the type of Hebrew that was used is a different
things
type
like
of
that,
Hebrew.
why they say that. But, the comment that I see being made is that, which I think is the point, is that it is somewhat written in the persona of Solomon.
Yes.
It reflects the life of Solomon. And I think there's a great sense of solidarity in the Jewish tradition where, in a sense, an author can sort of inhabit that perspective, I guess. And this is what you see here. You see the author, whether it's, I mean, it could be Solomon, as you say, that was the traditional view. These are Solomon's reflections, because it says at the start, the words of the teacher, and the Hebrew word there is Kohelet, son of David, king of Jerusalem. Now, it's interesting, while Proverbs does name Solomon, this doesn't actually name Solomon. That's quite curious, which is why this slight ambiguity here has left commentators thinking that we're meant to see a sort of Solomon persona here. And clearly the things that he described someone that has enormous wealth and so forth, has, had all the taps on in terms of worldly pleasures, so to speak, but looks like perhaps more of a sort of a literary production than an actual sort of first-hand memoir. But as I say, traditional view is Solomon. It could be that, but at the very least, why don't we go with this, Stu? At the very least, this is, I think, filtered through us through the persona of Solomon.
That's great. Probably two key phrases that are used throughout the book, we'll see. The vanity of vanities, depending on your translation, what that uses, or futility of futilities, or whatever. And then another one, under the sun. There's a passage there where frequently we talk about under the sun. Just unpack. Tell us a bit about what the phrase under the sun is really meaning before we begin to sort of jump into the text. Yeah.
So this book comes to us with a very much under the sun perspective. I think that's a good point. That speaks to the limitation, the sort of enforced limitation upon the human mind, upon the human perspective, because the writer here is trying to understand reality, is trying to understand life in this limited perspective, almost like someone shut inside a box that's trying to make sense of the things that pass through that small reality from a bigger outside, as it were. But there's very little consciousness of what's outside this under the sun perspective. And the classic example is what's beyond death. There's no consciousness here, or no awareness. It's not necessarily outrightly denying that there is life after death, that there's an afterlife, but it doesn't have that perspective. It just looks like that's where it ends. That's the edge of the box, as it were, of our human perspective.
Yeah,
and we can't really get out of that box, and so we're like sort of prisoners in a courtyard with big walls around us, and we're looking up at the sky, and we're trying to work out things about life that just don't make sense.
Impossible to work out.
And so that's the significance of the under the sun.
So it's really talking about our earthly human existence.
Yeah, that's right.
Not speaking into things beyond just our earthly.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't attempt to do that at all. It
doesn't talk about purpose beyond our life here. Really.
That's right. And which brings me to that phrase, vanity of vanities, or meaningless is in the NIV. Meaningless, says the teacher.
Futility,
utterly meaningless.
Yep.
Everything is meaningless. Now, vanity or meaninglessness, the Hebrew word there is the Hebrew word hevel, and it literally means breath, breeze, or vapor,
smoke, or something like that. Yeah.
The origin, of these words just gives a hint. It's of course the meaning of words is in its usage, particularly in its context.
Yes.
But the idea of breath or breeze or vapor, I think, helps here, because this is something that you can't grasp. You can't really grasp onto. It doesn't mean meaningless in that it's not saying that life isn't worth living in that sense. The thought here is that this means something like incomprehensible, unknowable.
Okay.
It just doesn't make sense. And this is this limited perspective, because living a life where so many things don't make sense is actually part of the art of living by faith. The thing that this book does, it doesn't deny faith. In some ways, it actually purifies it.
Yes.
By recognizing that there are just so many things in life that are fundamentally without meaning, in the sense, not that they don't have an ultimate meaning, it's just we don't always know what the meaning is.
Yes.
Right? We go through things, and often very difficult things, and we wonder, well, what was all that about? Why did I have to go through all of that? Now, sometimes we know, sometimes we can see it in our character, and we've just been through the book of Job, right? Job wonders why he had to go through all that. He never finds out,
no,
actually.
That's right.
We can see the effect. I mean, he gained wisdom in the end, but is that why? I mean, I don't think we can say that that's why. It just, and even though we in the book of Job, we got the outside perspective, the heavenly perspective somewhat. that doesn't really still answer the questions.
No.
The question about what was the meaning of all of that, that's outside our perspective. So going through experiences, bad experience, but even good experiences of pleasure that, again, can be, and this is the perspective here, that this is a man that has every tap of pleasure turned up full, right? Mm. And he finds himself empty at the end. Yes. The pleasures themselves seem really empty. Mm. And, if we go with Solomon's story, which very much lies in the background of this, it did. All of these pleasures led him in. Yes. They led him to bad places, So this is this closed perspective, and the inability to understand this is essentially what's behind that word, havel, or meaninglessness.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the opening statements, Stu, I think really set this up well. I think they capture the gist of the book, and it might be good, I think, to read
down to verse
the first
7.
Down there somewhere.
Absolute futility or vanity, says the teacher. Absolute futility. Everything is futile. What does a man gain for all his efforts? He labors at under the sun. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets. Painting, it returns to its place where it rises. Gusting to the south, turning to the north, turning goes the wind, and the wind returns in its cycles. All the streams flow to the sea, yet the sea is never full.
I love that.
I love that one too. The streams are flowing to the place, and they flow there again. All things are wearisome. Man is unable to speak. The eye is not satisfied by seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Can one say about anything, look, this is new? It has already existed in the ages before us. There is no memory of those who came before and of those who will come after. There will also be no memory among those who follow them.
It's in some ways, you said, Stu, that we're not going to go deep into philosophy, but just, one thing that I think of, there's a book by Albert Camus called The Myth of Sisyphus, and he likens the human predicament to the myth of the god Sisyphus, who's condemned to rolling a wheel a large stone up a hill, only to see it roll down again. And so the pursuit of our pleasures and the things that we work for, and I love that statement, the rivers flow into the sea, but the sea's never full. I mean, so it is with, we're never really satisfied. And it's a little bit like, Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill, and then it rolls back down again. It rolls back up and rolls back down. It's endless, sort of onerous. This is for Albert, Camus, this is essentially what life is like. And it's interesting, there's a whole stream of philosophy that sort of focuses or that thinks that we can find some liberation in recognizing the futility. It's an interesting word that was used there. The futility of life. And I've read a bit of that literature, and I actually, in some ways, I find it, from a Christian perspective, I can work with that, and I find it validating in one sense. I find it edifying, actually, even in the sense that it helps me to come to terms with the limited perspective that we have here. And that if indeed this is all there is, then it is absolutely pointless. Now, he's not making absolute statements about existence here. Yeah. He's making statements about this life, this under the sun perspective. It makes me realize and helps me, I think, to accept this situation in which we live, in all of its chaos, in all of its randomness. I mean, one of the things that people struggle with, I think, is the sheer randomness, this sort of chaos of life. And this is another theme that the writer, that Kohelet explores here, is that, you can work hard and gain a lot, but all of that could be lost in a moment or passes on to someone else, or it just seems so random and so chaotic.
And without an eternal perspective and therefore an eternal purpose, it does seem pointless. It's like,
that's right, yeah. And the thing is that's healthy about this is that I think people don't like facing this.
No, that's right.
And, this is where philosophers like Camus, and there's a South African philosopher called David Benatar who has written books essentially wanting to confront people with the essential meaninglessness of life, that this idea of, there being a meaning to life is ridiculous, and trying to impose a meaning on life, he thinks, can't be done without because he's an atheist, without a sort of eternal perspective. And we just need to face that. And, he thinks the idea of people providing their own meaning. I mean, this is where his arguments, I think, are very consistent.
Yes.
Because he says either there is an ultimate meaning or there is no ultimate meaning. The idea of us making a meaning for ourselves is not really what meaning means.
No, that's right.
You know what I mean? I appreciate that perspective. Now, I think, of course, there is a meaning to life. But, and here's, I think, the importance of this book, we don't always grasp that meaning.
Well, and it's not the meaning. We think the meaning is about the holiday we're going on next week, or very short-lived things. And I think this is what this book is trying to talk about. Even the wind thing, we sort of live moment to moment.
Yeah.
Whereas God, in an eternal perspective, has a purpose that's way beyond even this life, let alone this moment.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's what helps reshape that perspective for me. It's like it actually helps me put back in its proper place the things that I perhaps treasure too much about this world.
Yeah, that's right. And I think if I can just jump to the big picture and even the conclusion, preempt the conclusion. We get up today, we go through our day, listener, wherever you are, you're on with your day, right? I mean, there are a whole lot of things that are going to happen that are just, I mean, there are repetitive things. You could well ask, why am I even doing this? Things that will happen that'll be random. You think, why did that happen? None of that really you're going to know. But here's where this book finishes. It's essentially saying, okay, we don't really grasp the bigger meaning of all this. But here's the thing. Obey God, right? Just focus on this, right? Focus on the thing that's before you, right? You don't have this God-like outside perspective. We know, and the scriptures reveal the big purpose and the big meaning of life, but how that relates to what is actually going to happen today, you don't actually know. So here's the thing. Trust God and obey God today. Like just be obedient today. Make the best of each moment. It says throughout this book, right? Yes. Make the best of each moment. Like be grateful. Yes. Enjoy the things that come your way.
And there's nothing wrong with that either.
And there's nothing wrong with
enjoying the pleasures of that God has created and given us.
That's right.
It's keeping it in the context or the perspective of not elevating it to the only thing that matters or the most important thing.
Yeah, that's right. And above all, obey God. That's the, step by step we go through life and we obey God. And that's how we navigate through, as it were, the chaos through, we're like blind people. The perspective here is somewhat like a blind person that has no real idea of what's going on around, but follows the lead of the one that's guiding him. Yeah. And in the same way, we step through life, we obey God, and we trust that our lives are going to be significant. So it's not ultimately meaningless, but so much of our everyday experience is slightly baffling experience of not quite knowing what the meaning of these things are.
I love the angle you're taking there when we experience chaos and things that happen and we can't explain them and as particularly coming out of the Job thing. But I think there's a flip side of that for us, particularly in our culture, and I think obviously for Solomon as well, where we find ways to take things of this world to anesthetize this sense of it really isn't. And so I think for me anyway, the greatest struggle is finding all that I need in things of this world without reminding myself, but things of this world are coming to an end and there's something far greater. Yeah. And the reality is the rivers are going to flow to the sea as they have for hundreds of thousands of years before I got here, and they will potentially afterwards as well. It's a bit like fleas on a dog arguing about who owns a block of the dog, in reality. And I think
that's great.
There's the element of the chaos side of it, but I think our greater risk in our culture is to make ourselves happy, as you would say, without God. And I think that's what this speaks to. Interestingly, this book is part of what's known as the Writings, as you all know, which was a group of 5 scrolls. Interestingly, this scroll, and so those 5 scrolls were read out at the beginning of each of the main Jewish festivals. This scroll was read out at the beginning of the Festival of Booths or Tabernacles, which is actually at the end of harvest, at a time of celebration. Yeah. And so in a sense, to me, it's kind of like, hey guys, let's just remember everything's in God's hands here. Yeah. We're celebrating because we've had a great harvest, let's just say, but everything's in God's hands here.
That's
and
right,
tomorrow, it could be gone.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So he goes on and he talks about the search for
wisdom,
the quest for wisdom, which is he recognizes as something of a burden because he's trying to understand things, but again, we keep hitting the edges of of our ability to know and understand. And so,
in fact, he says the more you know, the sadder you'll become.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think that's because we reveal more our insignificance, because we like, our self-worth is often built up in our own significance. And the more we learn, and to some degree, and I'm talking about in a worldly sense, how insignificant we are in the scale of under the sun.
And particularly, I think, in our very intellectual environment and culture, and I'm talking broadly speaking about the sort of Western culture, which we do like to understand things, and we like to know, in a sort of outside, almost godlike sort of fashion. I think this book presents a real resistance to that.
Yeah,
and it doesn't really lead. It doesn't lead in, all of this speculation doesn't really lead to anywhere profitable. Again, I think this book is pointing us back to, listen, make the best of the moment, make the best of it. Just focus on trusting and obeying God.
Yeah.
And I know that's really simple, but I think throughout this book, this is pointing us back to a kind of simplicity in life. Like, life is very complex, and that complexity is inscrutable. I mean, it's beyond our grasp. So walk through the chaos with simplicity of heart. The message here is that there actually is joy in that. So this is not a sort of doleful book. This is actually pointing us towards almost sort of joy as resistance. Like, we can, in some ways, can leave all of that to God. All of the meaning we can leave to God. We can focus on obeying God and enjoying the goodness of God in the moment. As we have it, and God gives, God and takes away, as we saw in the book of Job. But we can be free just to make the best of the moment and to enjoy it for what it is. And I think what that does is that it liberates us to be in the moment and not always outside the moment, wondering what the big picture or where this is going, or because we're so prone to either take this sort of buffered sort of relationship to our own reality, like we're standing back wondering what it's all about, or where this is going, or what's tomorrow, and we don't actually dwell just in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think a book like this is liberating us to do that, because there's no point in standing back and trying to figure it all out. Just be in the moment and engage with it.
Which is kind of what Jesus was saying in John chapter 8, the truth will set you free. If you actually understand who you are, the scale of everything, and just rest in me, trust in me.
And Matthew chapter 6, do not worry about your life or what's going to happen, or whether you're going to just seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these other things will be given to you in their time. So that's the perspective here. He then turns to pleasures. And, this I think speaks so well to our culture, which is, sees the answer in a sort of fulfillment, slightly hedonistic fulfillment of our desires. And he sort of calls that out, like it doesn't really lead to anything. And it's not that there are not pleasures in life that can't be enjoyed, but when we make this the meaning of our life, that's the point here. As I think many people in our culture do. And this is something that we've talked about in our Thrive Perspectives podcast, that the sort of our cultural propensity to be on this, never-ending sort of Sisyphean quest for happiness. And I think this just so articulately calls that out.
And that doesn't mean that we can't enjoy things. It doesn't mean that we don't enjoy pleasure and stuff. But it's where its rightful places, isn't it, really, in our lives? And as you said.
Yeah, it's as he describes this, I mean, it's lots of language of I amassed this, and I hoarded this, and I pursued this. And it's the pursuit of these things that is the problem, because it never really stops. You're never really satisfied. Yep. You just need more and more, and it becomes a kind of addiction that the desire, in a sense, already outgrows the thing that you're desiring, and you just end up on this treadmill.
And even an element of competitiveness here, like I surpassed all others. It's like I got beyond everyone else, and I still wasn't happy. Kind of thing. Where we do tend to have this quest of keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak, and trying to make sure we've got as much as the next guy. So
and the irony here is, by pursuing that as an ultimate end, or as making that the meaning of your life, is actually the thing that robs you of the pleasure of it. I mean, there's so many good things in life, and if we can enjoy those things as having, as I've said before, a kind of sacramental significance, we can engage gratefully with the things that God has put in our lives. It enables us to be in the moment. It means that I accept this without needing more, without worrying about what comes next. I think this again is setting us free somewhat. This is calling out the pursuit of these things, and calling us to the enjoyment of what we have in the moment as we trust and obey God.
Yeah, that's great. He goes on to say that both the wise and the foolish share the same fate. We all die. He almost challenges the sake of wisdom for the sake of wisdom. At the end of the day, it's
by wisdom, I think he means. I mean, this is perhaps wisdom in the sense of that piece of advice that's going to lead to your success.
Yes.
It's a little bit like, the Proverbs. If you do this, if you work hard, if you're diligent, if you treat people well, things will go well with
Principles,
you.
Yeah.
Now, as a general rule, that's a good general rule. And the Proverbs, I think, do a good job of creating sort of general principles for how life, in all things being equal, works.
Yeah.
What I love about Job and Ecclesiastes, the way that they sit beside the book of Proverbs, is that they simply point out that, life actually doesn't always
work out that way.
Work out that way. All things aren't always equal. And there are all sorts of forces at work, chaotic forces at work in the world. A man can be wise and do the right thing and work hard and yet, end up
losing everything.
End up losing everything. And yet a fool can, almost by accident gain so much. So this is something that he, is thinking about, and he says in verse 14, I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both, because at the end, of course, in the end, there's death. And then whether they have or they don't have, if they have, it all gets passed on to someone else. So kind of what's the point of all of that? And again, the point is, okay, just enjoy what you have when you have it. And the point is obeying God. I'm at risk at being repetitive here, Stu.
No, well, I mean,
but
I
feel calmed.
Me too.
I really feel calmed by this. It's had this very interesting effect for me, giving me permission to stop trying to understand what everything's going on.
And stop striving.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we tend to strive a lot to get the next goal or achieve the next thing. And in some ways, what he's saying is that there's nothing wrong with ambition, but enjoy the moment, because who knows what could happen.
Yeah, and he's not saying give up on everything.
No, exactly right.
Because remember, the key idea here is that comes right at the end is obey God, right?
Yes.
And there's, we're to be diligent, right? But diligent with the things that we know, we're called to do and be, even though we won't see the fruit of that, ultimately, the ultimate fruit of that. Just focus on the moment and be the person that God calls you to be.
Then we move into chapter 3, and a bit that's sort of read out, as a beautiful piece of poetry, but in some ways it's making the statement that really these things are going to happen regardless of what you try to do to change them. Everything has its time, everything has its season. You can work all you want to try to live for eternity or build a legacy or whatever it might be, but everything has its moment in time.
You can love the winter, but summer, those hot, stifling summer days are still going to come around. But then winter comes after. It's the this is, I love the way this is pointing out the inevitable cyclical nature of life.
Yes.
And there's something about a cycle that feels a bit like a hamster's wheel. This is the effect here. Everything sort of cycles around. And so, again, the answer here, as he says, and I think it's worth just reading that last little part of chapter 2, Stu, because it's the beginning of a series of statements that have the word better. It's not that this is the ultimate, right? It's not making absolute statements.
No, it's not perfect.
In verse 24.
Yeah, I was going to read it. There is nothing better for man than to eat, drink, and to enjoy his work. I've seen that even this is from God's hand. For who can eat and who can enjoy life apart from him?
Isn't that rich?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
For the man who is pleasing in his sight, he gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. But to the sinner he gives the task of gathering and accumulating in order to give to the one who is pleasing in God's sight. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind.
So the thing I love about that statement is the focus on the engagement with God in the midst.
Yeah.
Accepting things from the hand of God with gratitude. God gives wisdom, knowledge. My version, the NIV, here says happiness. Joy would be a good word. Not happiness in the hedonistic sense, but a sort of rightly oriented heart. Happiness in the Greek sense. The Greeks had a word called eudaimonia, which is like a right spirit in a way.
Right.
And then he says here, but to the sinner he gives the task of gathering, storing up wealth to hand it over. Now, when it says he gives the task to the sinner, there's a sense in which he gives people over to this endless, exhausting kind of Sisyphean quest, for happiness. So in the midst of the cycles of life, to get back to chapter 3, there's a beautiful simplicity that we can embrace with God in the midst of all of that.
There's an occasion for everything and a time for every activity under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, time to weep and a time to laugh, time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to avoid embracing, a time to search and a time to count as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace.
Yeah, it all comes around, and yet it says, as it goes on to say,
what does the worker gain from
all of this? All of this temporal sequence goes round and round and round, and yet, and here's a really interesting point that he makes, and yet God has set eternity in the human heart.
Yeah.
Right. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. So this is the thing, the tension that he points out here is that we have eternity in our hearts. So we have this intuition of so much beyond this, right? And yet we can't really grasp that. We know it's there. The sense is here, if we didn't have that sense of eternity in our hearts, then, we'd just be like other creatures that just contentedly, fill their appetites, right? But we are different as human beings because we have this eternity in our hearts. We have this connection with God and with this greater spiritual reality. It's there, and it's part of what causes the vexation. Like in some sense, it can push us in some ways in the wrong direction as well, like because we have this yearning and we can fulfill that yearning in the wrong in the wrong ways, right? By trying to get out of the box, trying to almost gain a sort of godlike control rather than fulfill that by connecting with the God who is over all things. So I think there's an element of, the pain here, he thinks, is that we have this closed perspective, but we have an open reality. We're like birds with wings. We have these winged minds, so to speak, but we're in a cage.
Yeah.
Our reality currently is a cage. Now, of course, we know that there's a sense in which, not in the we're always going to be limited beings, but there is a sense in which we are going to be set free, right? Freedom is up ahead.
Yes.
Not freed in the Platonic sense, like we're going to just sort of live as spirits forever. But we do go to be with Lord, but we're meant to be embodied beings, and we will be again. But there is an entrapment here that he finds painful in our present circumstance and in this present chaos.
Yeah, and I think because we have eternity in our hearts, and if we don't have God, and we don't, as you said before, obey God and fear God and enjoy what God's given us in this moment, then what we try to do is we try to build our own self-worth and significance and perhaps our eternal kind of value in what we do. It's like, I've got to leave a legacy. I've got to, all of this kind of building up something to people will remember me by. And then really this is trying to say, hey, the only thing people remember you by really is if you obey the Lord.
Yeah, that's right. Which then does leave the legacy that actually is important.
Yeah.
And so, it comes back here. There's another couple of statements here. One in verse 12, where he says, I know that there's nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toil. This is a gift of God. Now, a lot of people can read this and think, hang on, no, but what about, surely there's better, that's not all that life's about. No, he's not saying that.
No, that's right.
He's liberating you to enjoy the things that God puts in
the
your
simple
lap.
things that we often just look over.
And receive it as a gift from God.
For more.
Yeah,
totally.
Because again, right at the end, obey God, right? We're that whole perspective of being on mission and obeying God is it sits here. Again in verse 22 of right at the end of chapter 3. So I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. So, okay, we have these things to do. We make a living. We might as well actually get up during the day with gratitude before God, accept the opportunities, accept even the work that we have to do, the productivity that comes from that, accept these things as gifts from God. There's again, beautiful simplicity here, Stu, that comes out of this that I think will help to orient us and pull us down, I think, into a humility and a simplicity of heart that is ultimately liberating. I've always loved Psalm 131, which, if I can remember this, my heart is not proud, my eye is not haughty. I do not concern myself, David says, with things too wonderful for me. But I've stilled my soul like a child weaned from its mother. So still is my soul within me. And I feel that psalm captures the disposition of this book. My heart is not proud in the sense that I'm not trying to grasp things beyond me. My heart is not proud, my eye is not haughty. I do not concern myself with things too wonderful, right? There's just some things that are too wonderful to know. But I've stilled my soul. I've stilled my soul like a child weaned, it's just been fed and has the satisfaction of the moment. And I think that simplicity of heart is something that Scripture points us to, from which I think we function better from that. We function in a more liberated way, and certainly in a more grateful and joyful way.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all our resources and much more at our website thrivetoday.tv. We really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading as we go through the Bible with Thrive. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper and thrive.